We don't want to hear any more recommendations without the evidence.
Healthcare remains one of the biggest concerns and challenges for every American family. We had a chance to catch up with Betsy McCaughey, the well-known New York Post columnist and former New York Lieutenant Governor, who's become a major national voice in exploring ways to deliver healthcare more efficiently and effectively than ever. She's also spearheading a drive to help New York return to its roots as one of the most important cities on Earth. Today, from Ballard Studios in West Hollywood, California, it's 13th and Park.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
That often is missing in politics.
We went from North Korea to Eminem. That's a lot, man.
Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
It's a nightmare.
Those are the facts.
We have to solve everything.
What's in this tea?
Great to have you on the show, Betsy. Been looking forward to this for many moons. You are an expert in healthcare policy. What is the state of healthcare in America today? If someone said, Betsy, here's where things are, how are we doing?
On the one hand, we still have the highest survival rates for cancer, heart disease, and we are the world's innovators, particularly pharmaceutical innovators. So we can be very proud of all that. On the other hand, there is a need for change, and this is the moment for it. If you look at life expectancy in America, it has gone steadily down since 2014. So when I hear so many health officials shriek with terror at the idea that the Trump administration is appointing what they consider disruptors like RFK Jr., I smile because our lifespan is declining. We got to fire the people who have been instrumental in that, right? I want to live longer. I'm happy on this globe. And I'm not talking about keeping people alive with lots of tubes and machines. I'm talking about adopting health policies that promote healthy longevity. And I can see that happening in this new incoming administration. I'm very excited about some of the appointments that have been made.
Well, you wrote a piece recently where you were giving advice essentially to the incoming Trump administration on priorities in healthcare. And one of those first priorities was one that just makes common sense, which is eat better, right? And that by eating healthier, the average lifespan of someone who's 40 years of age will increase by something like 8 to 9 years.
That's right. This is a new study out in Nature Food, a very prestigious journal. The study was done in the UK, but a similar population to ours. Mm-hmm. And it found that if you took a 40-year-old man who had an average mediocre diet and put him on a healthy diet, a lot of grains, a lot of vegetables, avoiding red meat, he could live 8.9 years longer. 8.9 years. That's a tremendous gift, right?
Yes.
A woman, it was 8.7 years. Now, if he had a really terrible diet at the outset, if he was eating suet and kielbasa and pate every day, right, you could actually increase his lifespan 10 years by changing his diet.
You know what's unfortunate about what you just said, Betsy? I like kielbasa and pate. You mean I have to take that out of my diet?
I understand how appealing kielbasa is, but 3 times a day, I wouldn't suggest it, right?
Let's talk about the CDC. I think it's fair to say there's been disappointment, and I think it's fairly universal. It's not partisan. It's universal in what the CDC did and didn't do. How do we get the CDC to do its job and do it better?
Well, first of all, to focus it, I rather irreverently call it the Centers for Disaster and Confusion. It was founded in the 1940s to control the spread of contagious infectious diseases, right? But now when you go up on their website and look at their goals, they're all really woke things like reducing gun violence. These are all good goals, but they're not the goals of the CDC. And they have totally forgotten their original mission. I'll give you the example that is closest to my heart, right? One of the biggest killers in America every year is hospital infection. Hospital infections kill roughly 100,000 people a year. That's more than breast cancer and gun violence combined. And they're almost totally preventable. The CDC should make it a very high priority. Reducing those infections isn't even on their list of goals. If you were to say, what is the number one predictor of who gets a hospital infection? Is it their age? No. Is it the disease that brought them into the hospital? No. the number one predictor of who gets an infection, what room or bed they're assigned to. Because if they're put in a bed and a preceding occupant had an infection, their risk goes up 583%, according to the Columbia School of Nursing. Almost 6 times as risk, because that previous patient was discharged, but their germs were left behind on the bed rail, the call button, the TB controls, the over-the-bed table, inadequate cleaning. You can fix that. That can be fixed.
Just by cleaning the room better, right? Just by
That's right.
Right.
Cleaning
Yes.
the room better. In fact, Robert Ornstein out at the Mayo Clinic found that if he wiped the high-touch surfaces right around the patient's bed once a day with a bleach wipe, he eliminated the most prevalent infection, C. diff, by 86%. Why isn't every hospital doing that? But what does the CDC do? To the contrary, if a hospital has an outbreak of a very deadly germ, one of the worst these days is called Candida auris. It's a fungal infection. 50% mortality rate for bloodstream infection.
Wow.
If they have an outbreak, they call in their reports and to their communications with the newspapers, they refer to it as Hospital A. Now, of course, you and I wouldn't want to be in a hospital overrun with that germ, but we can't find out which hospital it is because the CDC hides it. You know, in New York, we put the ratings for restaurants right on the front door. If you're not
absolutely.
to get a seat, everybody knows it before they walk in. We ought to have that information for hospitals.
You identified border security and port security as primary areas where we can improve the health of the nation. Explain that.
Well, because the United States is now confronted with having to battle diseases we had already conquered once. Whether it's measles, there's tremendous outbreaks of measles, tuberculosis. Boy, that's a name from the past, right? TB.
Right.
But now TB is up 34% over the last 3 years. New York is the mega center of TB in the United States because we are a migrant magnet. 85% of the cases of TB are among foreign-born people. And here, I just took this off the news this morning. Now we're worried about dengue fever.
Oh, yeah.
Big story up today. Dengue fever. It's like Zika. It can spread. And we do not want dengue in this country.
But you also identified fentanyl. And, everybody, I think now in America is at least more aware that fentanyl is a killer, that it is at epidemic levels. And a lot of the fentanyl, of course, is coming over the border.
Almost all of it. Not necessarily illegally. A lot of it's coming through the ports of entry. Not only do we have to close the border to illegals, but we also have to inspect much more rigorously at the ports of entry. Fentanyl is one of the biggest medical threats we have in the United States. All of us, if we're lucky enough not to have lost a child ourselves, we all have friends who have lost a child to drugs. All of us, right? I don't know anybody who's unscathed by that. So we have to take that very seriously.
This administration very clearly has signaled to everybody who's listening, we're going to change the way we do business. Another way of describing it is we're taking on a system that's let us down for far too long, that we have complained about for far too long without making those changes.
Yeah.
And some of the people coming in are going to go after challenging assumptions and making change. So let's talk about RFK Jr. There's no question among all the confirmation hearings to come, that is the one I think every American needs to listen to, because there's been some degree of hysteria whipped up about RFK Jr. What kinds of things would RFK Jr., as you see this, do that will effectively move the healthcare needle for Americans in a very positive way?
Well, he's been very focused on diet, something that we just discussed a few minutes ago. He said several times he's not going to take anybody's vaccine away, and I'm going to take him at his word because there's no reason not to, right? But let me point out that you don't have to take him at his word because the law won't let him. Vaccines are a state issue. RFK Jr. cannot change that, no matter what he says. He does not have the authority to change that. So I think people should take a big, deep breath and not worry about that. He doesn't have the power to tell your child's school not to have kids vaccinated anymore. It's not going to happen. Now, the person I'm most excited about, I just finished writing about him this morning, is Dr. Marty McCaughey. He's actually been a hero of my organization, the Committee to Reduce Infection Deaths, for many years. Marty McCaughey was out there championing patient safety. He's the one who pioneered the idea that in every operation, there should be a moment where all the surgeons stop, have a timeout and say, have we made any mistakes? Is there a sponge still in that guy, right? Did we operate in the right place? I think it's great that he's going to run the FDA because what we want is the evidence. That's what Americans want. They don't want to be told about masks, social distancing, closures in the event of a pandemic, or when we don't have a pandemic. We don't want to hear any more recommendations without the evidence.
Betsy, let me shift for a second to New York. The Committee to Save New York that you're very involved with, I would argue, is the most important city on earth. How do we get back on our game?
I started this organization with my partner, Ray Kelly, who's a marvelous man, longest serving ever police commissioner. We founded this because we looked back at the November 2023 election just a year ago. The number of people who turned out to vote in that election when all 51 city council seats were up for grabs was smaller than the number of people who voted with their feet and just left New York over the last 3 years. So that we have to create an organization that will be the vehicle, the megaphone for all of the New Yorkers who are giving up. We can't give up. We have to tell them you can voice your concerns. This is not ideology. People want safe subway rides. They want order instead of chaos on the streets. They want higher standards in the schools. That's not a Democratic or Republican thing. Everybody wants that. So this is an organization dedicated to being the megaphone for the silent, unheard New Yorkers.
For you, healthcare is personal, right? Your brother suffered from a severe case of asthma, put your parents in a very difficult position in terms of having to pay for medical treatment. Is this where your heart and soul was kind of focused on this as a life mission?
Well, it has been for many years. And as you know, ever since Hillary Clinton wrote her health plan way back in 1994, I've been writing about healthcare. And part of it was personal, but a lot of it also, I got very engaged by this when I was lieutenant governor because people would come to me with all kinds of health problems. I'd sit in my office late at night and open the mail. I noticed that more and more I was hearing one version or another of the same terrible story. I brought my mother, my brother, my husband to the hospital, and they contracted a deadly infection. So when I left office, I vowed I really have to do something about this. And I launched the Committee to Reduce Infection Deaths. And way back then, 23 years ago, not one state required hospitals to disclose their infection rates. We're up to 38 states, and we're coming after the rest.
I wouldn't want to be one of the other 12 knowing you're coming at me. Thank you for being on the show. I encourage you to continue to do everything you're already doing, which is, again, standing up and speaking out for things that will help make Americans healthier and make us feel more confident about the future we're about to embrace. But what you're doing, more importantly, for the people across America is about to become better known, as we now have a new gang in town ready to bring it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care of yourself.